Hey everybody, Arnaldo here, broadcasting from Fidelio's Frequency. Welcome to my channel. If you're new to vinyl collecting, if you're just starting your record collection, then this is the video for you. I have handpicked 10 records that I think you should own in your record collection. If you're already collecting records, you may want to stick around just out of curiosity to see what I recommend for first-time vinyl collectors. So let's take a look at the 10 records I've selected. Before I start off, I'd like to preface by saying I did not pick my 10 favorite, all-time favorite records. The criteria I utilized to select these 10 records is mostly based on what I think would be an introduction to an artist or to a genre. And I did span various genres, and I have picked some albums that are among my favorite albums of all time, and some are my favorite albums of this specific artist. So I'll be presenting these records in chronological order by release date, and the very first genre I would like to touch upon is one that I am still finding my way through. I'm not a connoisseur of jazz, but I have really gotten into it over the last 5 years or so. This record came out in 1959. It is the first jazz record that I bought back in the late and mid 90s on CD. I've purchased many other copies since then on vinyl, and I'm talking about the 1959 masterpiece Kind of Blue by Miles Davis on Columbia Records. It is considered one of the most influential jazz records of all time. It is my favorite jazz record of all time. Miles Davis is my favorite jazz artist. Miles, for me, can almost do no wrong. This album is probably is the highest selling jazz album of all time. I think it's around 5 million copies sold. Recorded in 2 sessions in March and April of, I believe, 1959, and with a fabulous backing band of John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley on the saxes, Paul Chambers on bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums, and the wonderful Bill Evans on piano. This album was introduced into the Library of Congress in the National Recording Registry. I believe when it first started, it was this registry started in 2002. It was one of the first 50 records introduced into the Library of Congress, deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. What else to say? I believe it is the perfect introduction to jazz, and I think this should be in every record collection. The next album I'd like to recommend is a folk album. He started off as a folk artist, even though he transitioned more into rock music, or what we call classic rock now. I'm talking about Bob Dylan and his second studio effort, released in 1963, also on Columbia Records. This one, unlike his debut album, which featured mostly, or almost entirely, except for 2 original songs, featured mostly cover versions of folk songs. This one is all originals except for 2. One is Corinna Corinna, that's a traditional song, and a co-write, let's call it. He borrowed a title from Henry Thomas on Honey, Just Allow Me One More Chance. But there are fantastic originals on this album. Blowin' in the Wind, Girl from the North Country, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. I think it's one of my favorite Bob Dylan albums from the folk period, and also included in the Library of Congress, the National Recording Registry. So it should be in your collection as well, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. The next pick was a little difficult. I wanted to present one rock album. There are so many I could choose from, so many that I love, and so many that I would recommend for someone starting off a record collection. But I always come back to my favorite band of all time, the Beatles, and my favorite record. So I think everyone should have a copy of Revolver in their collection. Released in 1966 after Rubber Soul. Rubber Soul was when the Beatles first started experimenting with different sounds, different song structures, different lyrical themes. This pushes the envelope even further, setting the stage for the following year's Sgt. Pepper in 1967, Why I think you should have this album in your collection. The song list, the track list is just one track. There's no skips here. This is one track after another that are just Beatles classics. Taxman, Yellow Submarine, Here, There, Everywhere, probably Paul McCartney's finest love song, probably one of my favorite of Paul's. Tomorrow Never Knows, She Said, And Your Bird Can Sing. I can go on, Eleanor Rigby. I can go on and on about the songs on this album. Beautifully recorded, I think, in my opinion. Probably one of the first great recordings in terms of sound by the Beatles. I think you should have this in your collection. It's a classic. Yes, also one of my all-time favorite records, Revolver. The next album is a heavy metal album. I typically don't talk about heavy metal on my channel, and if I'm talking about this record, I think it's because it is accessible and so representative and so fundamental in music and heavy metal especially. I believe it's considered one of the most influential heavy metal records of all time. Released in 1970, the second studio album by Black Sabbath called Paranoid. Fantastic songs on here, namely the title track, written and recorded in under 2 hours. Iron Man, Planet Crown with Ozzy singing through a Leslie speaker, and of course, War Pigs. Just classic riffs, classic songs. I think they appeal pretty much to anyone that's into music because you've heard them on the radio so many times, seen them in TV ads so many times, and maybe you've even watched an episode of Ozzy's TV series back in the early 2000s. So Paranoid by Black Sabbath should definitely be in your collection. The next record I would like to recommend is definitely one of my all-time favorite albums, definitely in my top 10 favorite albums. It's a classic. It topped the Rolling Stone 500 best albums of all time. Everyone knows Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, released in 1971. This album almost never happened. Berry Gordy, the head of Motown, didn't believe in Marvin Gaye's title track, What's Going On, thought it was a little too jazzy. When it was released, almost behind Berry Gordy's back by the Motown sales team as a single, it topped the Billboard chart. Berry Gordy immediately contacted Marvin Gaye and asked him to finish writing the album, and in 10 days he came up with a masterpiece. Still relevant today, lyrical themes touch upon war, poverty, drug abuse, even climate change. Of course, this too is also in the Library of Congress, in the National Recording Registry. It should be in your collection, not for that reason, but only because this is one of the greatest albums of all time, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. And now let's talk about country music. There are quite a few albums I could have picked from, but I wanted to pick something or an album that was accessible to those who are not huge lovers necessarily of country music, almost an entryway to country music. And I think every record collection should have a copy of Dolly Parton's Jolene, if only for the two huge songs on here. The title track, Jolene, which has been reinterpreted many, many times, most recently by Beyonce as well. And probably one of her most famous hits, which was made famous, even more famous, by Whitney Houston, and that is I Will Always Love You. This is her 13th studio album. I lost track of how many albums Dolly Parton has made, but this one is of significance because this represents her separation from Porter Wagoner, who was her performing partner, both on a TV show and also on his road show. Here's where Dolly Parton steps away from that professional relationship, and I Will Always Love You is hinted as a goodbye to Porter Wagoner, her professional partner. So Jolene, country album pick for you to have in your collection. 1976 saw the release of an album that many say marks the beginning of punk music. Yes, we had Iggy Pop and the Stooges in the early 70s, considered the godfathers of punk, but the official start, I think, of punk music was in 1976 with the debut album, self-titled album, by a band from Forest Hills, Queens, that is New York City. And I'm talking about the debut album by the Ramones, recorded in only 7 days, energetic, full of great pop melodies on top. Most of the songs written by Dee Dee Ramone along with Joey Ramone. And some of these songs are just fantastic. They still stand the test of time. Judy is a Punk, Beat on the Brat, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, Havana Fair. The album is only 29 minutes, and yet there are 14 songs on here. So, of course, very short songs, some less than 2 minutes long, but so full of energy. If there's one punk album that you need to own in your collection, that would be the debut album, self-titled, by the Ramones. And just 1 year after the Ramones' debut album in 1977, we have the release of another milestone record. This time it's a reggae album, and my personal favorite of this artist, the album is Exodus by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Critically acclaimed, probably his most commercially successful album, recorded in London after Bob Marley and Rita Marley fled their assassination attempt. Two sides that are slightly lyrically different. Side one is more focused on religious politics. Side two is more about love and faith. Stellar side two, my personal favorite. Most of these songs ended up on Legend, which is the multi-million selling compilation album by Bob Marley. So that shows you how important, how relevant, how great all of the songs on this album are. If there's one reggae album you should own, it would have to be Exodus by Bob Marley and the Wailers. And just as it was difficult for me to pick one rock album, indie alternative was also a very challenging genre for me to pick just one album. I had to go with one of my all-time favorite bands. You probably know this already, The Smiths, and my personal favorite. And if there's one album, one Smiths album you should own in your collection, it would have to be The Queen is Dead, their third studio album released in 1986. Eventually, I'll do a full-blown video on The Queen is Dead, but for now, I think this album finds Morrissey and Johnny Marr at their peak in terms of songwriting. Songs like The Queen is Dead, There is a Light That Never Goes Out, The Boy with a Thorn in His Side, lyrically touches upon, of course, personal themes, as you would expect from Morrissey, as well as some of those political soapboxing moments that he loves to have. Very beautifully arranged, self-produced. I could go on and on about The Queen is Dead. I think this is an essential album for the indie alternative genre. Some people don't like Morrissey, some people don't like his singing. Give it a shot if you've never heard of the Smiths. I think you should have this in your collection. So we started off with jazz, and in a certain way we're circling back to jazz with an album that is heavily influenced by jazz, released in 1991. This is a hip-hop rap album. It is their second studio album. One of my favorite hip-hop rap bands, A Tribe Called Quest. And I'm talking about The Low End Theory. I said heavily influenced by jazz. It has jazz samples, drum breaks, and even a jazz bass player, acclaimed Ron Carter, plays on this record. Lyrically, wordplay, very humorous, social commentary, of course. Probably considered one of the most influential hip-hop rap records of all time. One of my favorite, if not my favorite. And yes, I believe this also is included in the Library of Congress and the National Recording Registry. I think if there's one rap hip-hop album you should own, I would go with The Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest. And that wraps it up. Those are my 10 picks. Those are 10 records that I think anyone starting off a record collection should have in their collection. And please feel free to comment. I'm sure I'll get a lot of comments, a lot of opinions on what records I should have picked, or just disagreeing with the ones that I did pick and I recommended. I always love your comments. I always try to respond to all of them. Thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, just click that little button. It doesn't cost you anything. It is free. You're not committing to any kind of payment. And I guess that's it for today. I will see you on the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.